The ancient myths map out our internal landscape, our unconscious, those depths that are actually connected to the divine realm from which we can get divine inspiration. That connection with the divine realm, we can gain insight, clarity of what to do, and connection with our higher self, our deeper self. Now, this concept of higher self, I want to dive right into that. This concept of higher self has been turned into a new agey kind of, it's been so overused that we tend to push it away when someone starts talking about higher self, like, oh, is that some kind of new age concept? No, it's a very ancient concept, and today I'd like to go back to the earliest ancient Greek texts of Hesiod. Hesiod is one of the earliest Greek authors we know of. And in Hesiod's text, Works and Days, it's a poem. Ancient sacred texts are almost always done in verse around the world, or if they're not written down, they're passed down orally in verse. Hesiod wrote in verse, and he wrote a poem called Works and Days. And in Hesiod's Works and Days, he discusses the 5 ages of humanity, the 5 ages of mankind, starting with the Golden Age, and then dropping down to the Silver Age, and then the Bronze Age, and then there's an age of heroes or demigods where he says this is when the Trojan War happened, and now we're living, I wish I wasn't even living in this age, he says. It's too bad to have to be born into this 5th age. But he talks about the Golden Age, and he says some very important words for us to consider. First of all, the deathless gods who dwell on Olympus made a golden race of mortal men who lived in the time of Kronos, when he was reigning in heaven. And they lived like gods, without sorrow of heart, remote and free from toil and grief. Miserable age rested not on them, but with legs and arms never failing, they made merry with feasting beyond the reach of all evils. When they died, it was as though they were overcome with sleep, and they had all good things. For the fruitful earth, unforced, bare them fruit abundantly and without stint. They dwelt in ease and peace upon their lands with many good things, rich in flocks, and loved by the blessed gods. They are called pure spirits. Daimones is the Greek word. They are called pure spirits, dwelling on the earth, and are kindly, delivering from harm, and guardians of mortal men. So in the ages after this golden age was covered by the earth, after they went down to their sleep, their long sleep, they're still dwelling on the earth as pure spirits, daimones, kindly delivering from harm and guardians of mortal men, for they roam everywhere over the earth, clothed in mist, and keep watch on judgments and cruel deeds, givers of wealth. For this royal right they also received. Clothed in mist means invisible to our mortal eyes. They roam the earth, clothed in mist, invisible to us. In the epics attributed to Homer, when a god or a goddess appears or travels clothed in mist, they're invisible until they drop the cloak to allow mortals to see them. So the Golden Age daimones, daemons, spirits are still watching over us, traveling amongst us, but invisible to us. And then Hesiod goes on to talk about the other ages. He talks about how the Silver Age comes and then goes. And then he talks about the Age of Bronze. And then he talks about the age of the heroes. And then he says, would that I were not among the men of the 5th generation. Here we are in the 5th age. I wish I wasn't even in this one. I wish I was in a different one. I wish I'd died before or been born afterwards. So things will get better. They were better, and they're going to get better. These are the cycles, the ages. They're talked about in the ancient myths and scriptures and teachings of all the ancient cultures. They acknowledge this better age that came before, even a golden age. Today, we're separated from this teaching. We're taught that, oh yeah, we're living in the best possible time. Things have just been getting better and better. Technology's been progressing. We cannot accept any discussion of a higher culture living before any of the ancient civilizations that we know of. But the ancient civilizations we know of, they all talked about things were better in the past and they will get better again. There's this cycle of the ages. So Hesiod says, would that I were not among the men of the 5th generation. Let me tell you about them. For now is truly a race of iron, and men never rest from labor and sorrow by day and from perishing by night. We're in the age of iron. We never rest from labor. And he says, strength will be right. So might makes right. Reverence will cease to be. Observing and revering the order of the divine and the gods, that will cease, and the wicked will rule. And you'll have men praising the evildoer and violent dealing. But, he says, even these shall have some good mingled with their evils. Even those born among this time will have some good mingled in with all the evil. And remember, he just told us that the golden age spirits are still walking among us invisible. So I would like to discuss this concept of the higher self in conjunction with what Hesiod is telling us about the golden age spirits are still walking among us. We still have access to this golden age spirit that's watching over us, that's guiding us, that's even providing us with wealth and riches, invisible, unseen, and many will even deny it, but we have access to a higher self, a deeper self, and we can say a golden age self. Think about your golden age self, living in an age where there isn't this time of having to labor. The earth is just providing abundantly and without stint, without holding back, without stinting, and without having to be toiled. The earth provided. This is talked about in all the ancient wisdom of the world. The Garden of Eden talks about didn't have to till the soil until after the fall. That's when you're going to work by the sweat of your brow. Before that, the earth just brought forth abundantly, and also there was communication between mankind and nature. There wasn't a disconnect between men could talk with animals in the golden age. So in the golden age self, your golden age self, is still walking around, available to you but invisible. Think about how your golden age self would be if your golden age self were here. You can lie down and close your eyes and imagine your best self that has compassion and connection, hasn't been disconnected from other men and women, from the world of nature, from the animals, from the plants, and from the gods, from the divine. In this age, there's a loss of reverence, a loss of connection to the divine, a loss of connection to nature, a loss of connection between men and women, between family members. Hesiod talks about children won't agree with their father, fathers won't agree with their children, the generations will be divided. In the golden age, we were connected. we were in harmony. And we still have access to our golden age self. That's what Hesiod is saying. The golden age spirits are still here, but invisible. So let me talk about this very important hint that Hesiod gives us in this text. The golden age was ruled over by Kronos, by Saturn. Kronos is the Greek god that is associated with Saturn. In the Roman times, they would celebrate a Saturnalia, where there was no class distinction, or the class distinctions were all inverted. The hierarchy was overthrown because in the Golden Age, there were no classes, there were no divisions, and the Romans celebrated that with the days of Saturnalia. Saturn and Kronos, they ruled over the Golden Age. They were the figures in Greek and Roman myth who came down to live among men and women and preside over a golden age. The book Hamlet's Mill, published in 1969 and written by Herta von Deckend and Giorgio de Santillana, that very influential book, spend a lot of time focusing on Saturn and the golden age, how Saturn in the ancient myths around the world came down and dwelt among men and women and presided over an era of peace and harmony and connection. Now, who is this figure of Saturn? By understanding who Saturn is in the heavens, we can gain some insight into reconnecting with our golden age self. The myths are mapping out for us what's actually going on within us, including in that deep part of us, the unconscious. Most of us dwells in the unconscious. Most of our decisions and impulses come from our unconscious without our even knowing it. I've done a whole video on that. And the myths map that out, and they tell us of this most important aspect of us, our higher self, or our deeper self, our golden age self. And the connection to the stars helps us to understand what they are talking about, what they're trying to teach us. So this is a modern era statue of the god Saturn, but it is incorporating characteristics that are discussed in the ancient texts about Saturn. Saturn was a god of grain, a god of reaping. He came down and taught men and women how to eat grains so they wouldn't devour one another. He presided over a golden age, and around the world we have these civilizing figures who come down to teach about how to grow food and not devour one another and live in harmony with one another in a time of a golden age. And so Saturn carries this sickle. It's a implement of farming, but of course it's also an implement of cutting down, figuratively speaking, metaphorically speaking, cutting our lives short, the grim reaper, the end of our lives. So the sickle has a lot of connotations, and Saturn is a god of time. And even today, in the New Year's celebration, even in the United States and the West, we'll have this figure of Father Time carrying a sickle and also in his other hand an hourglass often. And old Father Time will then hand it over, his sickle and his hourglass, to the new baby New Year, who will then, by the end of the year, be old and hand it off again to a new year. So Saturn, Kronos, is a god of time. He's depicted and described as having a sickle and sometimes an hourglass. This gives us clues as to who is Saturn in the heavens. There's other clues as well I've discussed in some of my books and other videos. But Saturn, Kronos, is definitely associated with this very important constellation, Ophiuchus. Now, I've just outlined Ophiuchus in the heavens. Ophiuchus is such an important figure. Look at the outline of Ophiuchus. This central body shaped like a tombstone or an obelisk. That central tombstone shape of Ophiuchus. On either side are the serpent halves. The name Ophiuchus means a serpent holder. On the left, as you're looking at it, that's the serpent's tail. On the right, as you're looking at it, that's typically known as the serpent's head. But look at Ophiuchus, and now look at that statue of Saturn, that modern representation of Saturn. A sickle and an hourglass. Look at the sickle, look at the hourglass. Now look back to Ophiuchus. Can you see the sickle in the serpent's tail? Can you see the triangular shape of the hourglass in the serpent's head? Of course, an hourglass has two triangles, but that is Saturn. That is Kronos. That is the Lord of the Golden Age. That is the ruler of the Golden Age. Hesiod told us that the Golden Age of mankind was when Saturn ruled in the heavens. And Saturn is Ophiuchus. Why is this important? How does this help us to understand and connect with our Golden Age self? Ophiuchus is this pivotal figure in the myths of the world because Ophiuchus is down among the zodiac and yet not part of the zodiac, above the zodiac, but also down in it. A connection between the heavens and the earth. Let me outline some of the zodiac constellations that are seen in this image. There's a horizon in the image, so some of the constellations are rising and setting, and so we won't see all of them. But starting on the left, we have Sagittarius rising in the east. That's Sagittarius, partly under the horizon still. And then just below Ophiuchus is the zodiac constellation of Scorpio. Next to Scorpio, just in front of Scorpio, to the right of Scorpio, we see the zodiac constellation of Libra, the scales or the balances. And then comes the zodiac constellation of Virgo, the Virgin. And in front of her, to the right, to the west, going across the sky, is Leo, the lion. And then sinking down in the west and partly under the horizon, we see the zodiac constellation of Cancer, the crab. Now, why are they zodiac constellations? The zodiac constellations are the background stars through which the sun, the moon, and the planets travel. When we're looking up from our position on Earth and seeing the motion of the sun across the sky, the motion of the moon, and the motion of the planets, they're moving along the plane of the ecliptic. It's called the background stars of that path are the zodiac constellations. And I've drawn it from right to left because throughout the year, the sun travels along this path, as do the planets, except when they're going retrograde. Travels from the right to the left, goes through Cancer, and then Leo, and then Virgo, and then Libra, and then Scorpio, and then Sagittarius, and on through the background stars through the whole circle of the year. Now notice that the stars of Ophiuchus dip down into the path of the sun and the moon and the planets, into that ecliptic plane, into the zodiac. The zodiac is our realm. We are given the different gifts from the different gods and goddesses. The planets and the sun and the moon are traveling through the zodiac, and they are in those different constellations when we're born or as we go through life. Right now, Jupiter is in Taurus. The different gods and goddesses, they move through that line of the zodiac. That is where we are. In this earth, we are given gifts that are associated with the zodiac at our birth. That is the line, the plane of our earthly existence. And Ophiuchus is a figure that comes down to that realm but is above it and connects to the higher realm. Ophiuchus is the god that comes down to be with us. That's why Kronos, during the Golden Age, he comes down and lives among men and women and teaches them how to grow grain and feed themselves without cannibalism. Figures associated with Ophiuchus are pivotal figures between the divine realm and our realm. That is the Golden Age self that comes down to be among us is divine and also down here with us, but invisible. Notice Ophiuchus is hidden, not part of the zodiac. The golden age is the age of the divine down among us. Right now we're living in a very different time, but we still have some good mingled in this time. We still have access to our golden age self. Figures associated with Ophiuchus are associated with wisdom, clarity, connection to the divine realm, compassion, and I've mentioned in other videos and in my books and in my courses, Jesus is a Ophiuchus figure. He comes down, he's divine, but comes down and dwells among men and women. It's a metaphor. Jesus is a golden age self figure. The Buddha is an Ophiuchus figure. King Solomon is an Ophiuchus figure. That divine wisdom that comes from a higher place is associated with Ophiuchus because Ophiuchus is that divine part that comes down to dwell among men and women. That is your golden age self. We still have access, even in this darker iron age, to our golden age self. And this is not a new age concept. This is a very ancient concept. This is what the myths are trying to show us. And in the Rig Veda, a very ancient text, in Sanskrit text of ancient India, and in the Upanishads of ancient India, there is the concept of the Atman. Atman is the higher self, the divine self. And getting to know and regaining connection with Atman is our whole purpose in this life, or is a central purpose in this life. We have to recover connection with our golden age self, and we can, because as Hesiod tells us, the golden age daimones are still here walking among you, guardians, like a guardian angel, walking among us, but clothed in mist, so invisible, like Ophiuchus, among the zodiac, but left out of the zodiac, but our connection to the divine realm. Thanks so much for watching.